The desert sun was merciless, painting the horizon in shades of molten gold as Private Elena Ramirez adjusted the strap of her rifle and squinted against the glare. Even after months of training and deployment, the heat still felt like a living thing, wrapping around her like a heavy cloak, seeping into her bones. She had learned to move in silence, to let her breath fall in slow, measured beats. But inside, the pulse of anticipation never left her. Elena wasn't born into the military. She was the daughter of a seamstress and a mechanic from San Antonio, raised in a neighborhood where dreams were often smaller than the sky above them. Yet she had always wanted something more, a life that meant something, a way to stand for others the way no one had stood for her. When the recruiter spoke about service, about honor, about becoming part of something bigger, her heart had leapt like it had found its calling. Now, years later, the reality of that choice stretched before her in the silent expanse of a war-torn village. The walls of homes bore scars from bullets. Dust drifted lazily in the breeze, settling on the remnants of what once had been someone's life. Elena tightened her grip on the rifle, feeling the cool steel beneath her fingertips, grounding herself. She reminded herself why she was here: to protect, to serve, to bring a measure of safety in a world where peace felt like a distant dream. But there were moments, quiet, unspoken, when doubt pressed against her ribs. Was this truly making a difference? Could one soldier tip the scales of a conflict that seemed endless? Those thoughts crept in during the stillness, when all she could hear was her own breath and the soft crunch of gravel under her boots. Her team moved ahead, their voices hushed through the calms as they scanned the perimeter. She took her position on a rooftop, the rifle steady against her shoulder. From up here, the world felt both fragile and vast, every shadow a question, every flicker of movement a possibility. She let her eyes trace the patterns, the broken windows, the crooked doors, the outline of a child's toy abandoned near the threshold of a shattered home. It was in moments like these that Elena felt the weight of what she carried, not just the weapon, but the responsibility, the trust placed upon her. Her heart was steady, but her soul ached. For every mission, every briefing, every calculated risk, there was a human story unfolding just beyond her reach. As the sky began to soften into dusk, a call came through, a possible target sighted, moving along the northern edge. Elena adjusted her scope, breath held in the quiet between heartbeats. Through the glass, the world sharpened into clarity, a figure cloaked in dust, head low, steps quick. The shot was clear, the command crisp in her ear. And yet, just for a fraction of a second, something in her stilled. She thought of her father's hands, calloused from years of fixing engines, and her mother's voice humming lullabies on warm Texas nights. She thought of the promise she made to herself, to protect life, not take it recklessly. Her finger hovered, the world narrowing to a single breath. And then she missed. The shot rang out, echoing across the barren landscape, but the figure disappeared into the maze of ruins. A silence heavier than gunfire followed, pressing against her chest. She lowered the rifle slowly, her hands trembling despite the training, despite the years. It wasn't just a missed shot. It was the sound of something breaking inside her, a certainty, a confidence she had built like armor. The comms crackled with voices, but Elena barely heard them. All she felt was the hollow weight of failure settling like dust in her lungs. The night stretched long, and for the first time, she wondered if the path she had chosen would ever lead her home. The hum of the base generator was the only sound that kept her tethered to the present. Elena sat on the edge of her bunk, boots still laced, dust clinging to her uniform like the residue of a memory she couldn't shake off. Her rifle leaned against the metal frame, cold and mute, as if it, too, carried the weight of her hesitation. Night on deployment wasn't silent. It was a collage of distant voices, the rattle of machinery, and the occasional low thud from the far perimeter. But inside Elena's mind, there was a deeper stillness, a hollow echo replaying the moment she pulled the trigger and missed. Her teammates hadn't said much. A few passing glances, unreadable and heavy with unspoken questions, were all she had faced so far. She almost wished someone would shout, demand an explanation, anything to pierce the quiet judgment that lingered in their eyes. Instead, they gave her space, which felt worse. Silence, after all, had a way of amplifying guilt. She rubbed her temples, feeling the grit under her nails, and closed her eyes. The image returned without mercy, the figure moving through the rubble, the way her finger froze, the heartbeat that cost her everything. It wasn't just the miss, it was what it symbolized. A lapse in precision, in trust. And, in this world, precision wasn't just skill. It was survival. A knock on the frame broke her spiral. Sergeant Miller stood there, arms folded, his shadow stretching long under the dim, overhead light. His voice was low, measured, almost gentle. "Ramirez, walk with me." She followed him outside into the night air, cool and edged with the smell of diesel. The desert stretched under a moon like pale bone, stars scattered like distant fires. They walked in silence for a while, boots crunching against gravel, until Miller finally spoke. "You're one of the best shots I've seen," he said, not looking at her. But today, something was off. Elena kept her gaze ahead. I hesitated. The words were small, almost swallowed by the wind. Why? The question wasn't sharp, but it cut deep. She searched for an answer that wouldn't sound like weakness. Yet honesty pressed harder than pride. "Because I saw more than a target," she whispered. "I saw someone who might have been." She stopped herself. Civilian. Father. Brother. The words tangled. Miller nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that. "Combat isn't clean, Ramirez. It never will be. You second-guess in the field. You put lives at risk. Ours. Theirs. Yours." He turned to her then, his gaze steady, not unkind. "You need to decide what kind of soldier you want to be. And you need to decide fast." The walk back felt longer. His words weren't harsh, but they carried the weight of truth. Inside her chest, something tightened, a knot of fear and determination wound together. Later, alone again, she opened the small wooden box tucked deep in her duffel. Inside lay a photo, edges curled from years of being unfolded and refolded. Her family on the porch of their old house, sunlight washing over faces lined with hope and exhaustion. Her mother's smile, her father's steady hand on her shoulder. They believed in her. They believed in the uniform she wore like a second skin. She traced the photo with calloused fingers, her throat thick. "Don't break," she told herself softly, a mantra against the storm building inside. Outside, a convoy rumbled into the distance, headlights slicing through darkness. The scent of engine oil drifted in, mingling with the faint sweetness of sand at night. For a moment, she let the sounds and smells anchor her. She was still here, still standing. But the question lingered like a shadow. Was she strong enough to carry what this life demanded? Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it brought dreams of rooftops and blurred sights, of voices she couldn't reach and footsteps fading into dust. She woke before dawn, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a distant drum. The morning briefing was brisk, all business, coordinates, weather patterns, possible insurgent activity. She sat straight, her expression carved from stone, though inside, the fracture lines spread. Every word reminded her of the truth she couldn't escape. Another mission awaited. Another chance to prove she wasn't broken. When the meeting ended, Elena lingered, watching her teammates disperse. Laughter bubbled from one corner, hollow to her ears. She envied their ease, their ability to fold the weight of war into something light enough to carry. For her, every moment felt like iron pressing deeper into her bones. Outside, the sun was climbing, spilling harsh light over the sand. Elena adjusted her cap, her rifle slung across her back. Her reflection flickered in a metal water tank, hard eyes, a jaw set against the world. But behind that armor was a question no one could answer for her. As she stepped onto the transport, the heat rising from the ground like breath, Elena made herself a promise, not to erase what happened, but to carry it forward. To turn hesitation into precision, guilt into something sharper. She didn't know yet that this vow would shape not just the next mission, but the rest of her life. The wind rolled across the desert like a restless spirit, lifting grains of sand that shimmered under the hard, merciless sun. Elena crouched low against the crumbling wall of an abandoned outpost, the weight of her rifle steady against her shoulder. Around her, the world seemed to pulse in muted colors: beige earth, gray ruins, the pale blue of an open sky that felt too wide to belong to any single soul. It had been 2 days since the briefing. 2 days of carrying Sergeant Miller's words like stones in her chest. Decide what kind of soldier you want to be. They echoed now, in rhythm with her heartbeat, as she scanned the horizon through the scope. This mission wasn't routine. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was moving through the outskirts of a contested zone, a man linked to ambushes that had cost lives. Today wasn't about presence or deterrence. It was about precision. Elena exhaled slowly, pressing her cheek to the rifle stock. Through the glass, the world narrowed to clarity. Rooftops etched in sunlight, alleyways like veins across a forgotten town. And then movement. A flicker of fabric in the distance, a figure weaving between shattered walls. Her pulse quickened, but she held steady, adjusting the scope until the target filled her vision.
He was armed. No doubt this time.
The commands from her calm were crisp, stripped of emotion. Confirm. Engage when ready. She didn't answer. Words felt fragile against the gravity of the moment. For a breath, hesitation coiled inside her again, familiar and sharp. The memory of that missed shot burned like an ember, threatening to consume what little confidence she had left. But something shifted, quiet, almost imperceptible. Elena focused, letting the noise of doubt drain away until all that remained was the rhythm of her breathing and the steady beat of her heart. She saw the man as more than a silhouette, more than an objective. She saw him as danger, yes, but also as a thread in a tapestry larger than either of them, a pattern she couldn't fully control. And then, with hands steady and vision clear, she pulled the trigger. The recoil was familiar, a firm push against her shoulder. The report cracked through the silence, echoing off ruined walls. Through the scope, the figure crumpled like a shadow folding into itself. Time stretched, then snapped back, sharp and unrelenting. Voices flared in her ear, confirmation, commands, the rush of movement as her team advanced. Elena stayed still, her breath caught somewhere between relief and something heavier, harder to name. She lowered the rifle slowly, her hands trembling, not with fear this time, but with the weight of what it meant. She had done it. No falter, no pause. Precision as promised. Yet victory tasted nothing like she imagined. It wasn't triumph. It was gravity, pulling her deeper into the truth of this life. Every shot carried a piece of the soul. The team regrouped under a sky bruised with approaching dusk. Shadows lengthened, painting the ground in long, fragile lines. Sergeant Miller passed her a glance. Not praise, not condemnation, just a look that said you're still here. That matters. Back at the base, the noise swelled. Laughter, chatter, the clatter of gear. But it all slid past her like water over stone. Elena sat alone on the edge of her bunk, stripping the rifle with methodical care. Metal parts gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light, each click and turn a ritual to steady her thoughts. When the weapon was whole again, she reached for her journal, a battered notebook that smelled faintly of oil and sand. She turned to a blank page and stared, pen hovering. Words didn't come easily, not after days like this. But she forced them out, slow and uneven. One shot.
Clean.
No hesitation. She stopped, pressing the pen harder until the tip nearly tore the paper. After a long pause, she added, "Why doesn't it feel like enough?" The question hung there, stark and heavy. She closed the notebook and leaned back, eyes tracing the ceiling as if answers might be etched in the peeling paint. Outside, the desert wind moaned against the walls, carrying whispers of a land that had seen too much blood, too many stories ending in silence. Sleep stayed distant. When it came, it brought no peace, only fragments of rooftops and the hollow sound of footsteps fading into dust. And yet, as dawn stretched its pale fingers across the sky, Elena rose. Boots laced tight, rifle slung firm across her back, she walked out into the light. Not because the weight had lessened, but because she had learned to carry it. Today, there would be another mission. Another edge to walk, another choice to make. And for the first time, she felt a sliver of something, not joy, not pride, but clarity. The kind that doesn't erase the burden, but shapes it into purpose.
She was a sniper now.
And this was only the beginning. The war ended quietly for Elena, not with the thunder of guns or the crackle of victory, but with a single order delivered in a flat voice. Stand down. Prepare for redeployment. The desert that had swallowed years of her life lay behind her now, its winds carrying whispers she would never fully understand. Home came like a stranger. The air smelled different, thick with rain and cut grass instead of diesel and dust. Streets bustled with lives untouched by war, their noise a startling chorus after months of measured whispers and the hum of generators. Elena stepped off the bus, with her duffel slung across one shoulder, the weight of it familiar against the jarring lightness of everything else. Her neighborhood hadn't changed much. The same cracked sidewalks, the same corner store with sun-bleached signs. But she had changed. She walked past the old fence where her father once leaned on summer evenings, and her breath caught. The house stood quiet, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. Her mother answered the door with hands pressed to her mouth, tears spilling faster than words. Her father wrapped her in an embrace that felt both fierce and fragile, like holding on to something that might shatter. For a long moment, Elena let herself dissolve into that warmth, her body trembling with the release of 1,000 held breaths. But later, when the laughter dimmed and the house settled into sleep, the silence returned. She sat at the kitchen table, fingers curled around a mug of coffee gone cold, staring at the photograph tacked to the fridge, her younger self in a graduation cap, eyes bright, smile wide. She wondered if that girl would recognize the woman sitting here now, with calloused hands and a heart lined with shadows. Days blurred into weeks. People asked questions, gentle, curious, sometimes careless. Was it hard? Did you see combat? Are you glad to be home? Elena learned to answer in fragments, crafting sentences like armor. It was tough, but I managed. Yeah, I saw some action. It's good to be back. Words smoothed over truths that clawed at her in the dark, when dreams dragged her back to rooftops and burning skies. One evening, unable to bear the walls pressing in, she walked to the edge of town where fields stretched wide under a bruised sunset. The air smelled of earth, damp and alive, so unlike the arid breath of the desert. She sank onto the cool grass, tilting her head back until the sky filled her vision. Stars would come soon. She wondered how many of them had watched her through a rifle scope, patient and eternal, as she held her breath between life and death. A sound broke her reverie, the crunch of footsteps on gravel. She turned to see a boy, maybe 12, with a baseball glove tucked under his arm. He hesitated, then asked softly, "You're the soldier, right?" Elena nodded, unsure what to expect. The boy shifted, his eyes wide with something like awe. "My brother says you're a hero." The word landed heavy, almost bitter.
Hero.
She thought of the missed shot, the man who never walked out of those ruins, the silence of those who never came home. Still, she managed a small smile. "I'm just someone who came back," she said gently. The boy grinned anyway, as if that was enough. He waved before running off, leaving Elena with the echo of his words and a strange warmth stirring beneath the weight in her chest. Maybe heroism wasn't about spotless victories or perfect choices. Maybe it was about showing up, even broken, and trying again. As twilight deepened, she pulled out her journal, the same battered notebook that had carried her thoughts through the worst of it. Flipping past pages stained with dust and sweat, she found a clean sheet and began to write. Today, the wind smelled like rain. Today, I remembered how it feels to breathe without fear. Maybe that's worth holding on to. The pen moved slowly, but the words came, halting at first, then steady. like footsteps finding a familiar road. Each sentence felt like a thread weaving her back into the fabric of life, fragile but real. When she closed the journal, the stars had bloomed across the sky, bright and endless. Elena sat there for a long while, letting the night wrap around her like a promise. She knew the weight would never fully lift. The desert would always live inside her. The heat, the silence, the shot that changed everything. But here, under this open sky, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Not clarity, not closure, but a quiet kind of hope. Tomorrow, she would wake to the sound of rain against the roof, to her mother's humming, to a world that kept turning no matter how many times it broke. And she would rise, not as who she was before, but as someone tempered by loss and shaped by resilience. Today, she was home. And for now, that was enough. The morning light crept softly across the wooden floor of Elena's small apartment, laying pale ribbons of gold over the worn rug and the framed photographs lining the wall. Outside, the world stirred awake, a car engine humming in the distance, the chatter of neighbors, the faint rustle of wind teasing the leaves. Life had a rhythm here, steady and predictable, yet inside Elena's chest, the old current still moved like an undertow, pulling her back to deserts and silences that no one else could see. She had been home for 6 months now. The sharp edges of reintegration had dulled, but not disappeared. People stopped asking questions, assuming she had settled in. Her family smiled more easily around her, their worry folded away into drawers they hoped never to open again. To them, Elena was safe now, whole. But she knew the truth. Some battles didn't end when you left the war behind. They simply changed shape. This morning, her hands hovered over the kitchen counter, wrapping around a chipped ceramic mug. Steam curled upward, carrying the smell of coffee, a scent that used to mean comfort, now mingled with the metallic ghost of gun oil in her memory. She brought the cup to her lips, closing her eyes as the warmth seeped through her fingers. On the table lay her journal, its pages swollen from weather and wear. Last night, she had written one line before sleep claimed her, "I want to matter without a rifle in my hands." The sentence stared back at her now, stark and raw. The urge to do something, anything, had grown louder these past weeks. She had thought time would soften it, but purpose, once burned into your bones, didn't fade so easily. It simply asked new questions. That afternoon, Elena drove across town to a community center whose walls were painted with murals of hope, children holding kites, elders tending gardens. A banner fluttered above the entrance, Veterans Outreach Program, all welcome. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened as doubt whispered its familiar refrain, "What if you don't belong here? What if they see right through you?" Inside, the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and coffee. Folding chairs circled a low table stacked with pamphlets. Conversations hummed in pockets of warmth, voices carrying laughter tinged with something heavier, something only those who had walked similar roads could understand. A woman with silver-streaked hair approached, her smile gentle, her handshake firm. "You're Elena, right?
We've heard a little about you. Come on in."
No pressure, just stories. Stories. The word felt both terrifying and tender. For so long, Elena had spoken in fragments, trimming her truths to fit into polite spaces. Here, she sensed, was a room where silence could unravel without shame. She listened first. Men and women shared pieces of themselves like fragile offerings, losses carried, victories claimed, the stubborn ache of nights when sleep was a stranger. Some stories trembled. Others rang with defiance. All of them felt like echoes of her own. When it was her turn, she hesitated, the room waiting in quiet patience. Her voice came low, roughened at the edges. "I was a sniper," she said simply. No details yet, just the title that had defined her life and shadowed her dreams. Faces around the circle nodded, not in judgment, but in understanding that needed no translation. Words followed, slow, uneven at first, then gathering strength. She spoke of deserts that smelled of heat and gunpowder, of rooftops where time held its breath, of a missed shot that carved doubt deep into her bones. She spoke of clarity and cost, of coming home to a world that felt too loud and too quiet all at once. When she stopped, the silence that settled wasn't heavy. It was soft, like a hand resting on her shoulder. After the meeting, Elena lingered by a bulletin board cluttered with flyers, job programs, mental health resources, volunteer opportunities. One caught her eye, a mentorship initiative for young women considering military service. The tagline read, "Guidance from those who've walked the path." That night, back home, she sat at the table again, journal open under the warm glow of a single lamp. Her pen moved across the page with quiet certainty. Maybe this is how it begins, not with forgetting, but with giving. Not with silence, but with stories that help someone else find their strength before they lose it. She set the pen down, her chest easing with a breath that felt almost like relief. Later, standing by the window, Elena watched the city lights flicker against a sky stitched with stars. They didn't feel distant anymore. They felt like markers on a map she was learning to read, points of light leading her forward. The war would always live inside her, a shadow stitched into the seams of who she was. But now, for the first time, that shadow felt less like a weight and more like a shape, one that could cast shelter instead of darkness. Tomorrow, she would call the number on the flyer. Tomorrow, she would begin again. And as the night folded gently around her, Elena whispered to the quiet room, not a prayer, not a promise, but a truth she had earned through fire and silence. "I'm still here, and that matters."